This match is a race to 6.5 points to determine a winner. These two are fighting not only for the title of World Chess Champion, but also for a $1.1 million prize pool. Both players begin with 100 minutes. Should move 40 be reached, each player would gain an additional 50 minutes. Should move 60 be reached, each player would gain an additional 15 minutes. There is also a 30-second increment throughout, meaning when you make a move, you gain 30 seconds. So let's see how this game 1 of this match would play out. Carlsen opening with d4, Karjakin replying with knight f6, bishop to g5. Trompovsky opening, looking for a quick minor piece imbalance. We have that as early as move 4. In fact, 2 key imbalances are now present, one related to the knight for bishop exchange and the other related to pawn structure. White having the better of the two structures, black having a nice positive in that of the bishop pair. D takes c, knight c6, bishop b5, and now e6, looking to simply regain the material. White allows this, spends some time striking at black's center. It's important not to be too greedy here as white, trying a move like b4 to defend c5, as this provides a hook for black, allows black to strike and open up the position where the more pawn exchanges that are on board, the more likely that these two bishops will thrive. So, c4 instead, not allowing some rook activity as well, with the a file being opened up. b4 would allow that, right? b4, a5. Instead it's c4. D takes c, and now knight to d2. One thing to factor in these positions is, well, who's going to have the safer king? It'll be white. When you castle kingside, this is a perfect home, whereas black, not so much. It is split somewhat. There are some deficiencies here, some holes present on black's kingside. h6 and h5, to name both of them. Knight to d2. What is this doing? Well, maybe white is not so welcome to a queen exchange, sensing that maybe a bit more long-term, a king could be vulnerable on this side of the board. So it makes some sense to make black work a little bit to, let's say, get the queens off. Knight to d2 avoids the queen exchange. Black regains the pawn. White gets on with some more development. This pawn isn't going anywhere. He could be picked up at any moment. He is struck at twice, defended 0. Black castles. It's not the only move. Black can invest a move with, let's say, c3 in order to split up the a and b pawns. That was another possibility, not something black went with, instead electing to get some more development in. Castles on board. Both sides castle. And now knight to a5. Rook c1, piling up on this point some more. There is maybe some ideas connected with the rook being the one who recaptures, and then all of a sudden we can have the queen rook potentially being an attacking force against the black king. I believe that it would be something black could defend, but this is a possibility for some rook recapture and then swinging over to the g or h files. Bishop e7 is a nice move. The bishop is vulnerable on c5. It is unprotected there, and on what is soon to be a completely open file once he is picked up on c4. Queen c2, hammering away at this pawn, hit 4 times now, defended only once. He'll drop off at any moment. Bishop d7, there go the light square bishops. Queen c3. This was something that I did not expect. It is striking at the knight, and yeah, I thought knight takes pawn here, but I guess it could be a little bit awkward, this pin. You could play queen to e2. Knight takes c4, rook takes c4. could have several exchanges, and in the end, black has mobilized their pieces. This rook is not yet playing. So white tries for something else. Queen c3 strikes at this unprotected knight. And now the computer suggests b6, but instead the move queen d5 is played, which is perfectly fine. In fact, once it's played, you maybe have a better understanding of, why queen d5 instead of b6. What are some of the differences? Well, the key difference here is that the queen is also observing the e4 square. Let's keep in mind that queen c3 is striking at the knight, but also this guy here on f6. And maybe the knight is just a moment away from adding some more fuel to that point. Queen d5 not only defends the knight, but prevents knight e4. I like that move a real lot. Knight takes c4 was the follow-up. We now have several exchanges on board. Queens are gone. It's an endgame. You need to contest these open files. Black goes with the f-rook so that the king can get towards the center a bit more efficiently, pivoting on f8. White doubles. Very simplified before we even reach move 20. Rook d7, preparing to defend a rook on the 7th with rook d7. White cannot go straight in for this right away because that would be a mate in 1 and 2. So first, g3. And this is one of the, let's say the second, I don't know, one of the first points in the game that I thought it was interesting, this advance, this endgame position at least. Why g3? Why not g4? G4 is often a desirable move to, let's say, combat black's idea of expanding with this lead double pawn, to kind of stretch those pawns out. If f5 is played now, white could capture, and this would not be a good transformation for black, having double isolated pawns. These you could quite easily see these dropping off. Why not g4 to clamp down on this f5 idea? Well, by playing just g3, white keeps open the option for a rook swinging over to h4. Let's keep in mind one of the key weaknesses in black's position. It's minor, but it's still there, and that is the h pawn. That's an isolated pawn, and it is a pawn that will constantly need the support of pieces. So what is it that black would like to do ideally? Well, move the king towards the center, but at any moment that rook could maybe pivot on h4 and then put pressure on this pawn, and how do you defend it? That's one of the key differences, I believe, between g3 and g4. The pawn's still on g3, this remains a possibility. First, black plays rook to d7, defending now a rook entry. King to f1, and now f5. So, with this move, black is expanding with that doubled pawn. It's also providing a new square for the bishop to one day offset the knight. King e2, bishop f6. Also, bishop observes the h4 square. It's a very strong piece. These two are offsetting as it stands right now. I'm not really focused so much, in my eyes. I'm not seeing it as what does not capture my attention here so much is the knight and bishop, but rather the rook positions. And I see it as white having the slightly more active rook. This rook is in a defensive posture, and this is one that I could kind of poke around a little bit, throw some jabs at the black pawns. Right now, everything is under control. This is a fine position, but I see it as white who is still trying for maybe a little something. See how play follows. First, it's b3. Okay, saving a pawn. Black gets the king involved. Now h3, preparing a possible g4 move. Now, what might be your knee-jerk reaction to this move? If white wants to play g4, obviously you play h5. That's what I thought. There may be a drawback connected with this. This was an instructional point for me to see. h6 was the move played, not preventing g4. Why? If the pawn is on h5, this guy, again, he is isolated, and he may turn out to be a target. He will likely be more vulnerable on h5 instead of this h7 or h6 square. Why is that the case? Well, this knight can maybe reposition one day to f4, right? This pawn on h5 can also be fixed. Get your pawn on h4, threaten to, or just put your knight on f4, and that's an issue for black. He may very well drop off. So, in other words, not so fast, black. Not so fast to try and stop the g4 advance. Instead, it's the move h6. Now, if g4 was played in this position, right, we're waiting on here, move 25. This was black's last move. If white now were to follow through with this advance, it's really no big deal for black. This pawn, you really can't get at him so easily. He could be defended conveniently, now that he is still on a dark square here. He could be defended conveniently by the bishop. Maybe bishop g7 one day if necessary, but it's tough to see how you even, as white, put pressure on the h6 pawn. The key point, h5 should not be played on this move 24. Instead, we had the move h6. The knight now looks to reposition. Something needs to change. I mean, if we have a knight for bishop exchange, it's rook versus rook. Material is balanced. Sometimes you could have a rook ending where you're up a pawn plus and it still isn't enough to convert that full point. So something needs to change. White is trying something. A knight reposition, e1, d3. Black king is getting closer to the center. Possibly now with king to d8, looking to exchange rooks. The f-pawn is getting rolling. Now we have h5, another interesting point. Only after the f4 square is no longer available for the knight do we have h5. This is preventing g4. This is something that white may want to do next. If, let's say, a6, I'm not saying this is some great positive that white is obtaining here by playing g4 right now, but it's a healthy pawn island of 3, and maybe at some point this pawn can be struck at by the rook. Okay? So it's interesting to see how this played out, right? h6 just on move 24, a little knight reposition, and once f4 is in, and once black knows that the knight cannot make use of f4, aha! Now I'll interfere with this idea of playing g4. Following up, we have a4, rook d5. It wasn't the only possibility. Black could go in for some type of rook exchange, but rook d5, this is a strong piece. Keeping pressure on the knight means that the king cannot, let's say, come over to f3 and try to get in some type of pawn break, whether it be e4 or g4. The king has a responsibility. The king cannot go too far. The rook has some nice lateral influence on the position, keeping pressure on the knight as well. It's a really strong piece. Knight c5, b6, knight a6, bishop e7. Where is this knight headed? He's going for the c6 square. White was just threatening to pick up the a-pawn with knight c6. a5, knight c6, king e8. King to d7 seems natural, but it runs into knight to e5 check, so king to e8, knight e5, bishop c5. Slowly, black has consolidated. He got both of his pieces working, and yeah, the white pieces are basically under control here. Again, I see this as a really strong rook on d5, and now that the bishop is on c5, and there's this nice lockdown on both the b and c files, well, primarily the c file, you're not disrupting the bishop, and if you don't disrupt the bishop, your rook really isn't having a great influence on the c file. This is a strong link of pieces here and pawns, the bishop and pawn. So rook c3, king e7, he could be kicked and will be kicked shortly. f6 right around the corner. This is not a stable square. White looks for a rook exchange, seeing that this rook is just too good. Rooks are gone. The knight is kicked. Where to go with the knight? Knight d4. You could capture the knight, and this should still be a drawn king and pawn endgame, but it's not necessary to grab the knight. Improve the king position. Black all of a sudden now has replaced the rook with the king, and he stands very well on d5. Knight b5, king c6. Knight d4, king d6. Knight b5, king d7. And what are we having? Both sides realize there's not really a good way forward from this point. If either side, well, I shouldn't say it as if either side, but if white tries to get maybe a little bit too aggressive in some way with, oh, let's improve my king, okay, this is just a terrible blunder. White can't go too far. White has some things to worry about. It's not all about, okay, white could just steadily improve. No, there's maybe some drawbacks, in fact, connected with trying to get a little bit aggressive or trying to improve your king position. There are some pawns that are on dark squares that this bishop is just a moment away from capturing directly or indirectly. There really isn't a good way forward from this position. We had a little bit of a repetition at the end right here with knight b5 into d4. After this move 42, king to d6, these guys had enough. They met that first time control. They shook hands at this point. Game 1 ends as a draw.